Welcome to another episode of F&L Podcast. Our guest today is Anand Bhargav. Anand is the Global Segment Manager for PCMO and Small Engines. He is based in Singapore. He works for Chevron Oronite. Welcome to our podcast, Anand.
Hey, thanks, Vicky. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to sharing more details with you.
Thank you, Anand. So we start the show always with asking our guest to talk a little bit about themselves. This is your 30-second opportunity to be famous. So Anand, tell us about the more than 25 years you have spent in the additives industry. Where did it all start? And tell us about the work you currently do.
Well, I think 25 years in additive industry is quite a lot, as you all know, out of which almost 20 years has been in Singapore. So the positions that I've held is pretty interesting. It spans across starting from manufacturing, product management, sales, a lot of sales experience, and services, basically. Mainly focused in Asia Pacific region. In the last 2 years, I've taken on the job where I'm working as a global segment manager for main tier passenger car motor oils and small engines. This role is pretty exciting, essentially because it's global in nature. So all along, my experience has been in the region. But then when you look at things from a global perspective, then you see there's a lot more opportunities and a lot many more things to do. And that brings a lot more complexity and excitement to this job. So a lot of things happening, and I'm all looking forward to share my views on the motorcycle engine oils today.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about the personal side, Anand. What is your educational background? Are you an engineer by profession?
Yes, I'm in chemical technology by profession, and then went on to do my MBA here in Singapore. So that's my background. So that's helped me a little bit. But then the real experience, as you see, is in doing the job, right? So sales, product management. So that's where you really get those experiences.
Now, before you took on this particular role in the PCMO and small engine market, you actually were based in Shanghai. Tell us a little bit about your Shanghai assignment.
Yeah, this is back in 2019 when we were looking at kind of upgrading the China organizational capability, especially around the technology and the product development part. And so I was offered this position where I was assigned to go to China and look at the org capability of the team there and build the org capability there and setting up a technology center there. And not only looking at hiring people and coaching them and training them, but also develop a full-fledged strategy for the China market. From Oronite point of view, how we're going to position ourselves in terms of development, product development, in terms of catering to the customer needs, in terms of managing OEMs, in terms of addressing customer needs. And more importantly, we also were looking into developing capabilities around field testing. And so a lot of exciting stuff happened there in technology center in Shanghai. And that's when that was around 2-3 years. I spent 2 years there, and today the team is up and running, and I'm glad to see that worked out well.
So you were in China actually when COVID-19 started.
That is right. I was there when China started. That's true. But then, yeah, Shanghai was at that point in time a lot more, and not that affected. So we were going about doing our work as usual, as normal.
When did you actually move back to Singapore, Anand?
This is back in the end of 2020, and I moved back to Singapore, and that's when I got this global segment manager role. So that was a great opportunity, moving out of the region and then taking on a global role. And so having offered this global segment role, I thought this was more important to do as well. Yeah.
Well, this is a big job because you have a global role, but you're based in Singapore. Um, what is the reason for the role being Singapore based? Is it because everyone is now looking at Asia as the center of really the PCMO and the small engine market? Or tell us a little bit about, the evolution of this role. Traditionally, as a US company, a lot of the global roles have always been based in the United States or Europe, for example. How many global roles, for example, are based in Singapore at this time?
Very few global roles. So I think global segment manager role, this is the first time that's happening in Singapore. So as you know, Chevron Oronite is going through a lot of changes. And this is an opportunity for the organization to test out if we can do such global roles out of Asia Pacific region. And so I was one of those first ones getting those kind of opportunities. In terms of market, I think the main tier PCMO or the PCMO market is pretty strong, not only in North America, but also in Asia Pacific. And as you know, Europe is towards higher tier where they have OEM requirements and higher tier ASEA specifications to be met. But if you look at the majority of the market, it's purely North America and Asia Pacific region, especially on the passenger car. Small engines, as Asia Pacific is the biggest market, the largest, in fact, compared to the other two regions or the other regions in the world. So I think it made sense bringing this position to Asia Pacific and especially Singapore. And so far so good. It's working out quite well, and the organization is pretty happy about the way it's going.
So, Anand, for the last 2 years, we've been through the pandemic. I mean, we're still in the midst of the pandemic. How difficult is it to fulfill a global role during this time when, for example, on and off we have lockdowns in China? The rest of the world actually has opened up, Singapore being one of them. But we still have, for example, last week I believe Macau was under lockdown. Hong Kong still has quarantine. So how has this role been adjusted to accommodate to a different working environment? Are you mostly doing virtual?
That's right. I think like all other industries, I think we also adapted to working virtual. So those virtual meetings, which are using video conferencing, audio. So it's been that way for the last 2 years. We have not only found out ways to work together with a complex team, especially in other time zones. But then we have been pretty effective in delivering some of the important projects as well. Like one key project for passenger car has been for the Dexos 1 Gen 3 programs. So I think that was a huge project for Oronite to deliver in the midst of all this pandemic as well. So that was just an example. There were so many other programs that we have developed and delivered during this pandemic across the world. So yeah, adapting and quickly knowing how to manage the new technology, and then and more importantly, it's the people on the other side of the world also cooperating, right? So that was more important, and the whole organization rose up to that occasion, and that's how we could deliver some of the key business requirements.
Yeah, no, before we go into motorcycle, which is, I admit, is really very exciting, because Asia, I mean, Vietnam, Philippines, I don't know what the vehicle fleet right now is in the Philippines, but during the pandemic, definitely the motorcycle growth has been huge. And I think partly that has been facilitated by the availability of financing, because you have companies like Grab and other delivery services that just sprouted during the pandemic. And in the motorcycle side, what's going on? Tell us a little bit about the changes that you mentioned we're expecting in 2023.
Before I get into the 2023 specification itself, there's a lot of things happening in terms of the motorcycle market itself, right? So it's pretty vibrant. It's still been growing, as you mentioned. You've seen in Philippines, around Asia, it's been quite vibrant. I think it's fast developing in other economies around the world as well. Especially if you look at urban areas, right? So the two-wheelers or the population of the transportation mode is becoming a lot more popular, mainly because the population is increasing and there's a sizable population which requires a lot more transport mode, right? And two-wheelers becomes a lot more uh, conducive to these demography, which requires people to not only move from one place to other, but also to deliver a lot more services. And that's kind of changing in the recent times, especially after the pandemic.
Yeah. One more thing to add, though. A few countries are now getting ready to mandate um, e-motorcycles. Um,
Correct.
do you see this as a trend, or is this an aberration in the market?
So if you look at the trends, right? So basically, look at the drivers. So there are macro drivers, basically, which I just mentioned about rising income, middle class, growing middle class. They're buying more motorcycles, more younger drivers, and all those macro drivers are still rising and pretty conducive to the motorcycle demand. The other side, you also have technology drivers, essentially, which we are tracking. We have been tracking at Oronite. If you look at the emission regulations have always changed or led the reduction in hydrocarbon NOx or CO levels of motorcycles. And that's one regulation that continues to change, and it improves the motorcycle, the design and delivery of the motorcycle design itself is changing. In terms of specifications, it is changing as well. So JSO is coming out with their new specification, the JSO T903 specification being upgraded. Another major trend we are seeing is fuel economy, like what I mentioned earlier on, mainly due to the CO2 legislations to lower the greenhouse gas emissions. Most of the OEMs are looking at introducing lower viscosity oils. And when the low viscosity oils are kind of introduced, then essentially there is a lot more stress on the oil, and so this is also driving the need to change the specification as well. So having said that, electrification, there were quite a few drivers, but then if you look at a restraint, obviously electrification is a restraint for motorcycle, for passenger car and motorcycle, obviously. But what we're seeing here is essentially some markets moved very quickly, but the other markets out there are still going at a much slower pace than what was anticipated. And talking to the OEMs, they don't seem to be in a hurry to move quickly to electrification. And if you look at the countries, there are a lot other drivers in the countries which requires to continue having ICE engines while the electric motorcycles are also introduced. So we are looking at this. It is a disruptive space. We're looking at it a little bit closely, but at this point in time, we don't see a major threat. We probably will be doing a look back again, maybe 5 years from now, to see how the last 5 years has moved. But then, with all these changes happening, which is positive, and the OEMs looking at introducing new specifications in 2023, it gives a lot more confidence that the motorcycle engines are here to stay, The OEMs want to push that the engines out there, and we will continue to see demand for the lubricants as well.
Yeah. So Anand, give us a little bit of background on the motorcycle fleet. How big is the size of the market right now? How much of that is in Asia Pacific? And regionally, in terms of OEMs, who has the biggest market share? Is it the Japanese OEMs, the Chinese OEMs, or the European OEMs?
Yeah. So the motorcycle population, if you look at this, was we again are looking at basically some market reports. One of the market reports mentioned about 700 million units in 2019. So that was the last number we had. 2020, as you all know, saw a dip, but 2021 and 2022, we are seeing an uptick again in the sales and the population of motorcycles. The largest market is basically Asia Pacific. Out of that 700 million, almost close to 80%, or slightly more than 80%, is Asia Pacific, followed by South America, Europe, little bit of North America, especially Mexico, and then it's spread out rest of the world. In terms of manufacturing, obviously the Japanese OEMs are the largest. They have around more than 50% of the market share globally. The Indian OEMs, in terms of motorcycles and scooters, are number two, basically with close to 25% market share there. And then it's split into so many other OEMs there. But if you look at, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it makes sense that the JASO, which stands for the Japanese Automotive Standards Organization, is the driver behind specification changes.
The JASO stands for Japanese Automotive Standards Organization. So they roll out specifications, especially for motorcycles. And these motorcycles are basically a bunch of OEMs, motorcycle OEMs driven by Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki. And they form a group basically called the JASO Motorcycle Engine Oil Subcommittee. And this subcommittee looks into the specifications. And these specifications are basically mainly physical and chemical properties that they lay out. And they've also got some grades, basically. They grade the oil into 4 categories. We call it as JASO MA, JASO MA1, JASO MA2. So these are the 3 categories they use for motorcycles. And then for the scooters, where you don't have a wet clutch, scooters just run on a dry clutch. So for that, they have a specification called JASO MB. And they use the engine test. Basically, they have a small motorcycle engine, which is called SAE number 2 engine. And they measure the frictional properties of the oil in terms of, say, static friction, dynamic friction, and then stop time index. So these are the 3 terms that you will get to hear a lot more when you talk about the engine oil, especially motorcycle engine oil.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about the regulations around the world in terms of 2-stroke and 4-stroke. Some countries like Vietnam do not allow 2-stroke motorcycles anymore. Are there still countries that allow 2-stroke motorcycles, or is it mostly converted to 4-stroke?
Yeah, so different countries are having different specifications in terms different regulations in terms of electric vehicles, or banning the current 2-stroke, 4-stroke vehicles. 2-stroke generally is kind of heading out. It's becoming really small right now. But then if you look at electrification, that's the next step many countries are taking. As an example, say China. So China grew significantly in electrification right all the way from 2015 till 2019, 2020. and they kind of moved a large population of their motorcycles out to electrified vehicles. But that's again China, correct? So if we cannot expect the same kind of rollout or implementation in other growing countries or emerging countries. So every country has got a different requirement depending on where their emission regulations are heading towards. We are seeing changes happening, and that's a space where we are closely watching because this definitely impacts the motorcycle engine oil and also an impact on the users as well.
When you look at the motorcycle oil market, it seems like a lot of oil marketers are switching to synthetic base oils, or at least offering synthetic oils in the market compared to maybe 5 years ago. Do you see that as a trend in Asia?
The synthetic oils have been a trend. They have been used already in the motorcycle space. If you look at motorcycles, they have traditionally been using a few viscosity grades, basically 1030, one of the most popular, 1040, 1550, 2040, 2050. These have been some of the most popular ones. Of late, we have seen a 5W30 is being introduced, especially OEM like Honda is one of the first one to introduce a 5W30. So the trend towards lower viscosity grades is more predominant right now in the motorcycle industry. So when you look at the lower viscosity grades, obviously synthetics, semi-synthetics are being used by different marketers to position the product and differentiate as well.
When you need a 5W30 oil, what kind of base oil do you need to come up with the 530? Can you work with a group 3, or do you need a PAO? Or tell us a little bit about that part of the formulation spectrum.
The 5W30 oil obviously will require a group 3, so that helps to bring down. It helps a lot in lowering the viscosity of the oil as well, and also the HTHS, which becomes very critical. Combination of group 2 and group 3 is commonly used for formulating a 5W30 oil. But the OEMs are now talking about even going beyond 530 as well. So that's the space where we need to watch and see how it kind of unfurls, because there are some conflicting requirements here. The lower viscosity grades, does have challenges to the motorcycle engine, because as you all know, there's a common oil which is used in motorcycles. Not just for the engine, but then the same oil lubricates the gears, it lubricates the clutch plates, the whole engine oil, everything is lubricated by a single oil. So the demands of the motorcycle oil is quite significantly different compared to a passenger car, and so that's where we need to be careful. Going low on viscosity is a good trend to help the fuel economy, but on the other side, we need to carefully balance the needs of gear pitting, good frictional properties to manage the clutch.
And that's where additives come in, right?
That's right. So the additives make a huge difference in terms of how we formulate the oil, essentially to manage this. It's a very close management of how we have to not only bring the phosphorus level. So there's a diverging phosphorus sulfur limits between API and JSO. API 5W30 LSAC viscosity grade mandates that the phosphorus level can be a maximum of 0.08%, whereas the JSO specification talks about a minimum 0.08% phos, which means that you need to formulate an oil, an additive, which is right on top of the 0.08 specification. So those are the kind of challenges we go through. So balancing the phosphorus sulfur levels, not only to protect the engine durability, but also the catalyst and the after treatment system becomes a lot more critical.
Just a quick question, Anando. You mentioned API. Their spec, though, is for a four-wheeler, right? Why would their spec have any impact on a two-wheeler?
So what does the JSO specification do is basically they draw upon two performances. One is the performance of the clutch and the gears and those things which is defined by JSO, and then everything around the protection of the engine. Say, for example, the complexity. I mean, deposit, sludge, wear. Everything else, the PCMO API category brings a lot more value to the oil, which is again an IC engine. It's a spark ignition engine. So a combination of the two is how the JSO specification has been evolving over time. And what we have seen is API SP, SL, SN, and now we are even talking about introduction of API SP along with JSO MA2 into the specification. As I mentioned, the lubricant has to not only do the clutch, transmission, gear, but then what it also has to do is basically the API oil brings in the other aspects of the protection of the engine, essentially.
So let me just clarify what you just said. So you're saying a bottle of oil can actually meet an API spec and a JSO spec at the same time. So the formulator has to formulate within those both specifications. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. That's right.
Why can't they do one specific one for motorcycles and then they don't have to do the balancing thing that makes it more difficult for a formulator?
So if you look at the motorcycle engine, right? So it's the tighter emission controls, basically Euro 5, Euro 6. All this have led the OEMs to design a lot more modern motorcycles. So it's becoming a lot more compact, a lot more efficient, increased power density, tighter tolerances, and then increased expectation from the end user as well. So when motorcycle OEM looks at all these aspects, so it's very difficult for the motorcycle OEM to just draw upon either API or JSO to meet the complex requirements of the motorcycle. And in addition, as I mentioned, the motorcycle oil not only lubricates the engine, but also lubricates the clutches, gearbox, and after treatment systems. So there is a need to combine the two, meet the emission regulations, meet the engine durability, meet the after treatment system durability, yet manage gear fitting or wear and deliver a great clutch frictional performance. And so that's where I think the need to integrate the two specification comes up, and it's very unique for motorcycles, and especially from API SL and beyond. As the performance categories started going up, we started seeing that divergence, and we are seeing more and more necessity to have an oil which can provide this unique combination of the API oil and the JSO requirements.
How does JSO licensing work? API, we kind of know, they license the API and the LSAC categories. Who licenses the JSO? Is it a self licensing like the self certification like the ASEA?
So the JSO specifications again are managed by this working subcommittee. It's called JSO Motorcycle Engine Oil Subcommittee, and so they define the physical and chemical requirements of the oil. The specification is called JSO T903 specification, and essentially your oil has to be registered, which means you need to submit an oil, something very similar to API. You submit an oil, you provide all the data which they're looking out for, fill up the forms, and then apply for a JSO registration, and then you get to use the JSO number. They give you a JSO logo, and they also give you a number that you can put on your bottles, claiming that your oil meets JSO specification, so and so. So it's a proper specification which has been out there, as I mentioned, from 2006 onwards. There have been quite a lot of registrations of oils, especially in Asia Pacific, and it's very popular among the oil marketers to have their oil certified or approved by the JSO committee.
You mentioned that Indian OEMs are the second largest in the world. Do they have their own specifications in India, or do they use JSO?
JSO is very widely used across all the OEMs. Having said that, the Indian OEMs do use a similar kind of both JSO, and they have their own in-house requirements as well, in the sense that similar to, say, for example, Honda or Yamaha, they have the minimum requirement, which is the JSO, MA2 or MA or MB or whatever it is, plus the API specification, API SL, SN, SM, whatever it is. Along with that, that minimum requirement, the OEMs do have some in-house test. They do some testing depending on what they are looking for. Different OEMs look at different areas of performance, and once the oils meet those performances, then they approve the oil to be their genuine oil supplier or factory fill oil supplier, depending on how it goes.
Obviously, specifications make the world simpler. You have a baseline, you have a minimum standard. But for lubricant marketers, how do they differentiate their products in a very crowded space?
It is the same as other product lines as well. So it is difficult, especially when it comes to the motorcycle oil. The end user is not, and the consumer is not one who can afford a lot. Obviously, the motorcycle or the scooter rider comes from a demography or a economic group which is very cost conscious, and so it becomes a lot more important for the oil marketers to be very competitive. And different markets have got different demands. Say, for example, some markets, the end consumer is looking for quality. For some markets, the end consumer is looking for quality plus, what can you give me more than what the others are giving? So differentiation becomes a lot more important for them. And of course, there are some markets who would be using any oil. Just cost is most important aspect. So we have the whole broad spectrum of the consumer needs, which the oil marketers are kind of catering to with different kind of oils. But there is a constant demand for differentiated high-tier products. The reason being, the OEMs themselves, like Honda or Yamaha or Kawasaki, and also the Indian OEMs, they all have genuine oils, basically. And the genuine oils become a large part of their revenue stream as well, and being recommended by the OEMs during the warranty period and even after the warranty period. So that way, the sale of differentiated oil is quite strong in the motorcycle segment, especially.
Anand, what is the typical warranty period for motorcycles?
Again, it depends from OEMs to OEMs. But then, if you look at the after treatment device, basically they're looking at around 40,000 kilometers. That's where they look out for. The after treatment system is one space where right now it's critical. But in general, most of the motorcycle OEMs give warranty based on 1 year or 2 years, depending on the market. Again, it goes more from on a time basis.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground, both in the PCMO and the motorcycle space. Perhaps we can summarize everything we've just discussed. Maybe some last few words from you, Anand.
Oronite has developed products and solutions to not only meet the current needs, but also position ourselves for the future. And we have products and solutions to further enhance and differentiate your requirements in the market, not just from regular motorcycle oil, but in terms of differentiated performances and requirements of the modern motorcycle engine oil. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Anand, for your time.
Thank you very much, Vicky, for the opportunity. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.